There was someone standing on the beach, just standing there, watching our house. My name is Frank. I want to start by saying my girlfriend and I almost didn't make it out of that house. What was supposed to be a romantic beach getaway turned into the most terrifying 72 hours of our lives. It was last summer. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for months, and my girlfriend Milagros had been dropping hints that we needed time together. Real time, not distracted dinners or half-asleep movie nights. So I decided to surprise her with a weekend trip. Just the two of us, somewhere quiet, somewhere we could actually reconnect. I spent hours scrolling through rental listings until I found it, a secluded beachfront house on Dune Road. The photos were stunning. Weathered wood exterior, wraparound deck, private beach access, and not a single neighbor for at least half a mile in either direction. The listing described it as a hidden gem, perfect for couples seeking privacy and peace. The price was surprisingly reasonable too, which now I realize should have been my first warning sign. I booked it immediately. We arrived Friday afternoon. The drive down was perfect. Milagros was genuinely excited, kept squeezing my hand and talking about how much she needed this. When we pulled up to the house, it looked exactly like the photos, maybe even better in person. The ocean was right there, waves crashing against the shore, seagulls overhead. It felt like we'd escaped to our own private paradise. But the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first. The house was clean enough, decorated nicely, everything technically in order, but there was this faint smell I couldn't place. Musty, stale, like the windows hadn't been opened in months, despite the listing claiming the place was rented out regularly. I noticed a few pieces of furniture seemed shifted slightly from the photos. The couch was at a different angle, a lamp was missing from the corner table. Small things, things you'd dismiss if you weren't paying attention. There was no welcome packet, no instructions for the Wi-Fi or the appliances, no emergency contact information left on the counter like you'd expect from a rental. Just an empty house waiting for us. Milagros didn't seem to notice any of it. She was already out on the deck taking photos of the sunset, calling out for me to come look at how beautiful everything was. So I pushed my unease aside and joined her. I told myself I was overthinking it. I'd been stressed. My brain was looking for problems where there weren't any. That first night, we made dinner together, drank wine on the deck, and fell asleep to the sound of the waves. It should have been perfect, but I couldn't stay asleep. I kept waking up every hour or so, my mind refusing to settle. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying. I slipped out of bed, walked to the large window facing the ocean, and looked out at the water. That's when I saw him. A figure standing on the beach about 50 yards from our house, completely motionless, facing directly towards us. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed closer to the glass, trying to make out details in the moonlight. It was definitely a person. I could see the outline of shoulders, a head, legs planted in the sand, but they weren't moving. Not walking, not looking around, just standing there like a statue staring at our house. I watched for what felt like 10 minutes. They never moved once. I almost woke Milagros, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? There's someone standing on a public beach at night? That's not a crime. People take late-night walks. People stargaze. Maybe it was a fisherman waiting for the tide. I was being ridiculous. I went back to bed and eventually fell into a restless sleep, convincing myself it was nothing. The second night changed everything. I found myself at the window again around the same time, 2 a.m. like clockwork. I told myself I was just checking, just proving to myself that there was nothing to worry about. He was there again, but this time he was closer, much closer, maybe 30 yards from our deck now, still motionless, still facing the house, still just standing there in the darkness like he had all the time in the world. My heart started pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some random beachgoer. This person was watching us. I barely slept the rest of the night. Every small sound made me jolt awake. The house settling, the wind against the windows, the distant crash of waves. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. The next morning, I told Milagros I was going for a walk to clear my head. What I actually did was circle the perimeter of the house, looking for anything unusual. I found it beneath our bedroom window. Footprints, fresh ones, deep impressions in the sand, like someone had been standing there for a long time, standing and watching. The blood drained from my face. I followed the prints with my eyes. They led from the beach directly to our window and then back toward the dunes where they disappeared into the tall grass. I ran inside and told Milagros everything. The figure on the beach, the fact that he'd gotten closer, the footprints right outside where we'd been sleeping. She listened, but I could tell she wasn't as alarmed as I was. She said I was probably being paranoid. Maybe it was a curious neighbor checking out the new renters. Maybe it was just some local kid messing around. She reminded me that stress does weird things to the brain and suggested I was looking for reasons to worry because I hadn't fully relaxed yet. I wanted to believe her, really did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. So while Milagros took a shower, I sat down with my laptop and started digging into the listing. The first thing I noticed were the photos. I'd been so focused on how beautiful the house looked that I hadn't paid attention to the details. But now, looking closer, I could tell they were old. The vegetation around the property was different. Bushes that were overgrown in person looked neatly trimmed in the listing. A wooden planter on the deck that was weathered and cracked in real life looked brand new in the listing. These photos were at least a year old, maybe more. I searched for the property address online and found almost nothing. No other listings, no reviews, no mention of it anywhere except the one site where I'd booked it. That's when I decided to call the host. The number rang 4 times before someone picked up. A man's voice answered, but something about it was immediately wrong. It was flat, monotone, like he was reading from a script or wasn't quite present in the conversation. I introduced myself as the current guest and mentioned I had a few questions about the property. There was a long pause before he responded. Too long. I asked about the footprints under our window, asked if there had been any issues with trespassers or locals coming onto the property. Silence. Then he said he'd look into it and hung up.
No explanation, no reassurance, no follow-up questions, just dead air and then nothing. I sat there staring at my phone, my skin crawling. Every instinct in my body was screaming that we needed to leave. But it was already late afternoon, and Milagros had spent the day relaxing, finally seeming happy and at peace. I didn't want to ruin it based on a feeling. That decision almost cost us everything. Night 3. I was already on edge before the sun even set. I made sure all the doors were locked, checked the windows twice, kept finding excuses to look outside, scanning the beach for any sign of the figure. Around 11 p.m., Milagros and I went to bed. She fell asleep quickly, but I lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the house made. At exactly 1 a.m., the power went out. The hum of the air conditioning died. The small lights on the smoke detectors went dark. The house was plunged into complete blackness. The only light came from the moon filtering through the windows. Milagros stirred beside me. "Frank, what happened?" I told her to stay quiet, told her it was probably just a blown fuse, but my hands were already shaking. Then I heard it. Footsteps inside the house. They were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere near the front of the house, moving down the hallway toward our bedroom. Milagros grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She'd heard it too. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was inside with us. I moved as quietly as I could, sliding out of bed and grabbing the only thing I could find, a heavy lamp from the nightstand. I motioned for Milagros to get behind the bed. Then I crept toward the bedroom door and locked it. The footsteps stopped right outside. I could hear breathing, slow, patient breathing just on the other side of the door. Then the handle began to turn, slowly, so slowly, testing to see if it was locked. It caught, held. The door didn't open. For a moment, there was nothing. Complete silence. Then the handle turned again, harder this time, more insistent. The door rattled in its frame. Milagros was crying silently behind me. I was gripping the lamp so hard my knuckles were white. I had no idea what to do. If that door gave way, we were trapped, one way in, one way out, and he was blocking it. Then I remembered the window. I grabbed Milagros and pulled her toward the bedroom window. It was a 6-foot drop to the sand below, not ideal but survivable. I unlocked it as quietly as I could, slid it open, and helped her through first. Behind us, the handle was shaking violently now. He knew what we were doing. I threw myself through the window just as I heard wood splintering. I didn't look back. I grabbed Milagros's hand and we ran, barefoot, in our pajamas, sprinting through the sand toward the road. We didn't stop until we reached a gas station 2 miles away. The police found no one at the house when they arrived, but what they discovered in the following days made everything worse. The owner of that property, the real owner, had died 8 months before our trip. Heart attack. The house had been sitting empty ever since, tied up in probate. It was never listed on any legitimate rental site. Someone had created a fake listing, collected payments from unsuspecting guests, and had been using the house for God knows what. We weren't the first victims. When the story made local news, 3 other couples came forward. They'd all had similar experiences: the figure on the beach, the feeling of being watched, strange noises at night. But none of them had reported it because they thought they were imagining things. We were the only ones who ran. I still don't know who that man was or what he would have done if we hadn't gotten out. And honestly, I don't want to know. But here's what keeps me up at night. The police never caught him. He's still out there somewhere. And every time I see a rental listing that looks too perfect, too private, too good to be true, I wonder if he's found his next hunting ground.
Story 2. My name is Lewis. What I'm about to tell you still doesn't feel real, even though I lived through it. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'm back in that water, feeling them circling around me in the darkness. This happened about 3 years ago. My younger sister Carol and her husband Nicholas had been going through a rough patch. Nothing serious, just the stress of life piling up. Work, bills, the usual stuff that wears couples down. I suggested we all take a trip together, get away from everything, reconnect like we used to before adult life got in the way. I found this tiny Gulf Coast town online. You've probably never heard of it, and I'm not going to name it because honestly, I don't want anyone else making the mistake of going there. It was one of those places that barely shows up on a map. A few streets, a handful of businesses, a cheap motel right on the water, and a long stretch of empty beach. The photos made it look peaceful, untouched, like a hidden paradise that tourists hadn't discovered yet. We drove down on a Thursday afternoon. The town was even smaller than I expected. Population couldn't have been more than a few hundred people. The motel was run down, but clean enough for the price. Our rooms faced the ocean, and when we stepped out onto the little shared balcony, the view was actually stunning. Clear blue water, white sand, not another tourist in sight. But something felt off from the moment we arrived. The locals were strange. Not rude exactly, but distant in a way that made you uncomfortable. When we walked into the small grocery store to grab supplies, the woman behind the counter barely looked at us. She rang up our items in silence, and when I tried to make small talk about the weather, she just nodded and looked away. Same thing at the gas station, same thing at the little bait shop near the pier. Everyone we encountered seemed to look right through us, like we weren't really there, or like they wished we weren't. That first evening, the 3 of us decided to check out the only bar in town. It was this cramped little place with wood-paneled walls and a jukebox that looked like it hadn't worked since the 80s. There were maybe 6 or 7 locals inside, all of them turning to stare at us when we walked in. We grabbed a table in the corner and ordered drinks. The bartender was an older guy, maybe late 50s, with deep lines on his face and hands that looked like they'd seen decades of hard work. He brought our drinks over himself, which I thought was odd, since there was a waitress standing right there doing nothing. He set the drinks down and lingered for a moment. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I'll never forget. "Y'all aren't from around here." It wasn't a question. I told him we were just passing through, taking a little beach vacation. He nodded slowly, then leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "Don't swim at night. You hear me? Don't go in that water after dark." I waited for him to crack a smile, to tell me he was joking or trying to spook the tourists, but his face was dead serious. His eyes held mine for an uncomfortable moment before he straightened up and walked back behind the bar without another word. Carol and Nicholas had heard the whole thing. We exchanged looks and then burst out laughing. It was such a cliché, the creepy local warning the outsiders about some mysterious danger. We figured it was just small-town superstition, maybe a story they told to mess with visitors. We joked about it for the rest of the night, doing dramatic impressions of the bartender's warning. Don't swim at night. We should have listened. The next day was perfect. Warm sun, gentle breeze, the beach practically to ourselves. We swam during the day with no issues. The water was calm and warm, exactly what we needed. By the time evening rolled around, we were sunburned and happy, sitting on the balcony with cold drinks watching the sky paint orange and pink. That's when Carol suggested it. "Let's go for a night swim." Nicholas was immediately on board. The heat hadn't let up even after dark, and the idea of floating in cool water under the stars sounded appealing. I hesitated, the bartender's words flickering through my mind, but I pushed them aside. I wasn't going to let some old man's superstition ruin our vacation. We headed down to the beach around 10 p.m. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the water. The sand was still warm under our feet. There wasn't a single other person in sight, just us and the ocean stretching out into darkness. We waded in slowly. The water was warmer than I expected, almost bath-like, lapping gently against our legs as we went deeper. Carol was the first one to dive under, surfacing with a laugh and pushing her wet hair back from her face. Nicholas followed. I was the last one in, still scanning the darkness around us out of habit. The water came up to our chests. We floated on our backs, looking up at the stars, talking about nothing important. For a few minutes, it was genuinely peaceful. I started to feel stupid for ever being worried. Then Carol stopped moving. She was standing in the water about 10 feet from me, completely frozen. Her face had gone pale in the moonlight. "Something touched me," she whispered. I swam over to her immediately. "What do you mean, like a fish?" "No," her voice was shaking, "like a hand. Something grabbed my ankle." I looked down into the water but couldn't see anything. The moonlight only penetrated so far, and below our waists was nothing but blackness. I told her it was probably just seaweed or a curious fish, tried to keep my voice calm even though my own heart was starting to race. That's when I saw them. Dark shapes moving in the water around us. At first I thought they were shadows, tricks of the moonlight on the waves, but they were too deliberate, too coordinated, moving in a slow, wide circle with us at the center. "Nicholas, Carol, we need to get back to shore right now." Nicholas turned to look at me, confused. "What? Why?" He never finished the sentence. Something erupted from the water beside him. A man, fully submerged until that moment, lunging up and grabbing Nicholas by the shoulders, trying to drag him under. Carol screamed. I lunged towards them, swinging blindly at the attacker. My fist connected with something solid. A face, a shoulder, I don't know, and the grip on Nicholas loosened for just a second. "Swim!" I shouted. "Get to the beach!" We started thrashing towards shore, but the water seemed to fight against us. More shapes were converging now. I could see them clearly. People, at least 5 or 6 of them, swimming with terrifying speed and precision. They moved through the water like they'd been born in it, silent as sharks. One of them grabbed my leg from below. I kicked as hard as I could and felt my heel crack against bone. The grip released. I kept swimming. Nicholas was struggling ahead of me, Carol pulling him by the arm. One of the attackers surfaced right next to them, reaching for Carol's hair. I threw myself at them, shoving the attacker's head underwater and kicking off towards shore. The sand had never felt so far away.
My lungs were burning. My muscles screamed. Every second I expected to feel hands closing around my ankles, dragging me back into the darkness. But somehow my feet finally touched the bottom. I stumbled forward, grabbed Carol and Nicholas, and we crawled onto the beach, collapsing on the sand, gasping for air. I spun around, expecting them to follow us out of the water. They didn't. The shapes had stopped at the waterline. I could see them now, standing in the shallows, watching us. 5 of them, maybe 6, just standing there in chest-deep water, motionless, their faces hidden in shadow. They didn't say a word, didn't move, just watched. Then, one by one, they sank back beneath the surface and disappeared. I was trying to process what had just happened when Carol grabbed my arm and pointed down the beach. About 100 yards away, near the pier, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. 2 figures were dragging a third person across the sand toward the water. The person being dragged was struggling, kicking, trying to break free. But the figures moved with calm efficiency, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. The struggling stopped once they reached the waves. Carol was sobbing. Nicholas was in shock, barely responsive. I grabbed both of them and ran. We didn't go back to the motel. We didn't pack our things. We ran straight to the car in our soaking wet clothes and drove until that town was 100 miles behind us. We stopped at a state police station just before dawn. I told them everything. The bartender's warning, the attack in the water, the person being dragged on the beach. The officer listened with a face I couldn't read. When I finished, he pulled out a folder from his desk and slid it toward me. Missing persons reports, dozens of them, all from the same stretch of coast, all tourists, all last seen near that beach. He told me the official reports called them drownings, accidents, riptides, but the numbers didn't add up. Too many people, too many accidents in water that locals swam in every day without incident. They'd been investigating for years, but could never prove anything. No bodies recovered, no witnesses willing to talk. The town protected its own. We gave our statements and left. As far as I know, no one was ever arrested. The town is still there on the map if you look hard enough. The beach is still open, and somewhere out there, people are still booking cheap motels and ignoring the warnings from locals who won't quite meet their eyes. The locals kept telling us not to swim at night. Now I know why. And I know they weren't trying to protect us. They were warning us because they knew exactly what would happen. But here's the part that haunts me most. When we were running to the car, I looked back one last time at that dark stretch of beach, and in the moonlight, I swear I saw more shapes emerging from the water. Not 5 or 6 this time. Dozens. All of them standing at the shoreline. All of them watching us leave. And I could have sworn, one of them waved goodbye.
Story 3. My name is Zachary. I'm a photographer, or at least I was before what happened. I used to spend every free weekend chasing hidden locations, abandoned buildings, forgotten trails, places that don't show up on tourist maps. There's something magical about discovering a spot that feels untouched, like you were the first person to see it in years. That obsession almost got me and my 2 best friends killed. This was about 2 years ago. My friends Esther and Barbara had been begging me to take them on one of my road trips for months. They wanted the full experience. No itinerary, no reservations, just driving until we found something worth stopping for. So we loaded up my Jeep and headed down the Carolina coast with nothing but a vague direction and a sense of adventure. For the first few days, it was everything we'd hoped for. We found empty beaches, ate at hole-in-the-wall seafood shacks, slept in the car when we couldn't find cheap motels. Barbara kept a journal. Esther made playlists for every mood. I took hundreds of photos. It felt like freedom. On the fourth day, we were driving down a stretch of coastal highway I'd never been on before. The road hugged the shoreline, offering glimpses of the ocean through gaps in the trees. That's when I spotted it. An unmarked dirt path veering off toward the water. I slowed down. There was no sign, no indication of what was down there. Just tire tracks in the sand and overgrown vegetation on either side. Exactly the kind of thing I lived for. "We have to check it out," I said. Esther groaned. Barbara laughed, but neither of them objected. That was our whole thing, following the unknown to see where it led. The path wound through dense brush for maybe half a mile before opening up to a small, secluded beach. It was stunning. Untouched sand, gentle waves, and not a single person in sight. But what really caught my attention was the lighthouse. It stood at the far end of the beach, maybe a quarter-mile away. Old, weathered. The white paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and it had the look of something that hadn't been operational in decades. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the base, but even from a distance, I could see the gate was hanging open. "Please tell me we're going over there," Barbara said. I was already walking. The lighthouse was even more impressive up close. It had to be at least 80 feet tall, built from brick that had weathered to a deep reddish brown. The door at the base was wooden, cracked with age, but surprisingly intact. I was framing a shot of the entrance when a voice came from behind us. "Beautiful, isn't she?" We all spun around. An elderly man was standing about 20 feet away, smiling warmly. I have no idea where he came from. One second the beach was empty, the next he was just there, like he'd materialized out of thin air. He looked to be in his 70s, maybe older. White hair, deeply tanned skin, wearing faded khaki pants and a button-up shirt that's seen better days. His eyes were bright blue, almost unnaturally so, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, walking closer. "Don't get many visitors out here anymore." I relaxed a little. He seemed harmless enough, friendly even. I introduced myself and explained we were just passing through, looking for interesting spots to photograph. His face lit up. "A photographer? Well, you picked the right place. This old girl has been standing here since 1887. I should know. I was the last keeper before they automated everything." He launched into a story about his years working the lighthouse, maintaining the light, watching ships pass in the night. He was animated, enthusiastic, the kind of storyteller you make you lean in and listen. Esther and Barbara were charmed immediately. Then he made the offer. "Tell you what," he said, gesturing toward the door. "How about I give you the full tour? Take you all the way to the top. The view up there, nothing else like it on the whole coast." Barbara looked at me with excitement. Esther was already nodding. I hesitated. Something felt slightly off, though I couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was how suddenly he'd appeared. Maybe it was how eager he seemed. But my friends were already moving toward the door, and I didn't want to be the paranoid one ruining the adventure. So I followed. The inside of the lighthouse was dim and musty, lit only by the sunlight filtering through small windows. A spiral staircase wound upward along the interior wall, the metal steps groaning under our weight as we climbed. The old man led the way, still talking, still telling stories. But how we climbed the higher, the more his stories started to bother me. He mentioned dates that didn't quite line up. Said he'd started working there in 1962, but then referenced events from the early 50s like he'd witnessed them firsthand. He talked about the old keeper before me, but then slipped and called the man by a name he'd used for himself earlier. Small inconsistencies, things you might not notice if you weren't paying attention. I was paying attention. I grabbed Esther's arm and whispered, "Something isn't right. His story keeps changing." She gave me a look. "Zach, he's like 80 years old. Old people mix up details. Relax." Barbara glanced back at us. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said, forcing a smile, but my heart was starting to beat faster. We reached the top. The old man pushed open a heavy door, and we stepped out on the observation deck. He was right about one thing. The view was incredible. You could see for miles in all directions. The ocean stretched endlessly to the east, and the coastline curved away to the north and south, dotted with trees and empty beaches. We were completely alone out here. No other cars in the lot, no other people on the beach, no one who knew where we were. That thought had barely formed when I heard it. Click. I turned around. The old man had closed the door behind us. His hand was on a padlock I hadn't noticed before, and he was threading it through the latch. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He finished securing the lock and turned to face us, and in that moment, everything about him changed. The warm smile was gone. The friendly crinkles around his eyes had hardened into something cold. His posture shifted, becoming more rigid, more predatory. He looked at the three of us like a cat looks at cornered mice. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said quietly. His voice was different now, too. Flatter, emptier. "You'd be amazed how many people wander down that little dirt path. Photographers, couples, families looking for a quiet beach." Barbara's voice came out as a whisper. "Doing what?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he took a step toward us, and we all instinctively stepped back until we were pressed against the railing. "No one knows you're here," he continued. "No one saw you turn off the highway. Your car is hidden in the brush. And this lighthouse," he gestured around, "it's been abandoned for 40 years. No one comes here. No one checks. It's just me and whoever's unlucky enough to find this place." Esther was trembling beside me. Barbara had tears streaming down her face. I was trying desperately to think, to find a way out of this.
I had to do something. Had to buy us time. I noticed Esther's eyes darting around the observation deck, looking for another exit. There was a small hatch in the floor near the far corner, probably a service access from when the lighthouse was operational. If I could keep him talking, keep his attention on me. "How many?" I asked suddenly. He tilted his head. "How many what?" "How many people have you brought up here?" A pause, then a slow, terrible smile. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He seemed pleased by the question. He started talking, describing previous visitors the way a collector might describe rare coins. A couple from Ohio, a group of college students, a solo hiker who'd wandered too far from the trail. He spoke about them in past tense. While he talked, I watched Esther inch toward the hatch. Barbara caught on and shifted slightly to block the old man's line of sight. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. Esther reached the hatch. Her fingers found the handle. She pulled. It opened. The old man's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes went wide with fury. "Go!" I screamed. Everything happened at once. Esther dropped through the hatch. Barbara scrambled after her. The old man lunged toward them, but I threw myself in his path, tackling him around the waist. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger. We crashed into the railing, grappling, his hands clawing at my face. I felt his fingers dig into my throat, squeezing. Stars exploded in my vision. Then Barbara was there, swinging something metal, a piece of equipment she'd torn from the wall. It connected with the side of his head, and he staggered backward, releasing me. "Move!" she screamed.
I didn't need to be told twice. I dove through the hatch, half falling down the ladder inside. Esther was already at the bottom, yanking open another door that led to a maintenance corridor. We ran. Behind us, I could hear the old man recovering, his footsteps thundering on the metal stairs above. The corridor was dark, claustrophobic, filled with pipes and cables. We had no idea where it led. We just ran, bouncing off walls, tripping over debris, not daring to slow down. Finally, we burst out into daylight through a rusted door on the side of the lighthouse. The beach was ahead of us. The car was somewhere beyond the brush. We sprinted across the sand. My lungs were on fire. Every second I expected to feel his hands grabbing me from behind. But we made it to the path, made it to the Jeep. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up with shaking hands. Esther was screaming at me to hurry. Barbara was watching the path behind us, looking for any sign of him. The engine roared to life. I floored it. We didn't stop until we reached the highway. Even then, I kept driving, putting as many miles as possible between us and that lighthouse. We flagged down a police cruiser about 20 minutes later and told them everything. The cops went back to the lighthouse that same day. They found evidence of long-term habitation, a makeshift living area in the basement, supplies, equipment. But the old man was gone, vanished just like he'd appeared. What they found in the following weeks was worse. There was no record of anyone by his description ever working at that lighthouse. The last official keeper had left in 1978 when the light was automated. The man we'd met was a ghost as far as any official record was concerned. But he was connected to something very real. Over the next few months, investigators linked him to at least 4 missing persons cases along that stretch of coast. Hickers, tourists, photographers, people who had wandered off the beaten path and never come back. They found belongings buried in the dunes near the lighthouse, personal effects that matched the missing. They never found bodies, and they never found him. The case is still open. The lighthouse is still standing. And somewhere out there, that man is still waiting for the next curious traveler to wander down an unmarked path. I've driven past hundreds of lighthouses since then. I used to think they were beautiful, symbols of safety, guiding ships through the darkness. Now, all I see is a trap. And every time I pass one, I wonder, is he there, watching from the top, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake we almost didn't survive? Some nights I still dream about that observation deck, about the click of that padlock, about the look in his eyes when he realized we were his. And I wake up grateful, grateful that we got out, grateful that we're still here to tell this story. But I also wake up terrified, because I know the truth. We weren't special. We weren't smarter or faster or braver than his other victims. We were just lucky, and luck runs out. The beach is supposed to be a place to relax, to get away from it all. Sun, sand, waves, paradise, right? But sometimes what you're trying to get away from is already there, waiting. In a secluded rental that was never really for rent, in dark water where the locals know better than to swim, in an old lighthouse at the end of an unmarked path. These places look beautiful in photos. They look peaceful from a distance. But beauty can be a disguise, and peace can be a trap. If you have a story you'd like to share, something that happened on a vacation, a road trip, a place you never should have gone, drop it in the comments or send it to the email in the description. Your story might be featured in a future video. And remember, stay aware out there, even in paradise, especially in paradise.